Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the second week of National Safety Month, and welcome to Chris Dornfeld from the Whistle Rewards Organization. Excuse me. I knew I was going to get that wrong. He is the president and co-founder, and he's here to speak with us today on a extremely dynamic topic we are all very excited to learn about. Retain workers, boost safety, the science and strategy. This is a very hot topic. So I am going to just move us right along and we'll go on ahead and get started. So a brief reminder to those of you who have been following and joining us in National Safety Month this month, the beautiful month of June. Here at the National Safety Council, we have a lot of amazing resources and content available to you throughout the month. This is our second week of National Safety Month, where our topic is employee engagement. Next week will be roadway safety, and the last week will be well-being. Please, please, please sign up. There is a link here in this PowerPoint to access all of the amazing resources that the Council is offering for National Safety Month. Please also register for our next event happening later this month, the annual Workplace Safety Summit, Innovation to Application, hosted by the MSD Solutions Lab. Lots of exciting stuff going on. And thank you to our sponsors, Eco Online, for helping to make National Safety Month possible. Next slide, please, Chris. I want to take a brief minute to talk about the Work to Zero program. My name is Hannah, and I'm the Senior Program Manager of the Work to Zero program at the National Safety Council. And our mission is to work to eliminate workplace fatalities by 2050 through the adoption of emerging technology. So we are here advocating for the adoption of technology in workplaces to reduce injuries and fatalities. We have a lot of resources available on our website. So come check us out. And we are super excited to be co-hosting this webinar with Whistle Rewards and learn about their dynamic software opportunities and insights. Next slide, please. So at Work to Zero, we do serve a variety of different organizations, primarily companies and organizations operating in non-transportation high-risk industries, such as construction and materials moving occupations. We also serve technology solution providers ready to bring their innovative technologies to market. So if you have an innovative technology solution that you would like to explore with us, please feel free to reach out. We have a resource called the Tech Hub Marketplace. I'd love to share information with you on that. Or if you want to learn more about innovative technologies or how to adopt them, the Work to Zero team is your primary go-to resource. Next slide, please, Chris. And within Work to Zero, we do use 3 different sort of pillars for our programs and our resources. We offer webinars, just like this one, to engage and interact with our audiences and share valuable information and insights about what's going on in the world of safety technology. We also conduct research. We have a series of white papers, case studies available to you on our website. And then we have partnership opportunities through our grant programs, through our Safety Innovation Challenge, through our Advisory Council and our Tech Hub Marketplace. So lots of different ways to get involved if you are interested or if you're in need of some more information about safety technology in the workplace. With that, I believe that is my last slide. I tried to get through these as quickly as I could. I do want to give our amazing speaker as much time as possible to share this information with us. So I would love to welcome Chris to today's webinar. Thank you, Chris,
Thank you,
for being here.
Yeah, my pleasure. Great to, well, I guess I can't see everyone, but great to be here. Hopefully everyone can hear me okay and see everything. And thank you, National Safety Council, for the opportunity to partner with you. I'm excited both about the research, that you've done, the research we're talking about doing in the future. And I agree, this issue related to workplace engagement, the impacts into safety, the connections are really interesting to talk about. So as Hannah mentioned, I'm the president and co-founder of Whistle Rewards. I've spent the last 25 years really focused on designing experiences and looking at human behavior. I started my career as an architect. Little funny footnote, I designed the Jack Daniel's Visitor Center early in my career, ended up getting into technology, was the first CIO for the city of St. Louis. worked across government, startup companies, global corporations. And the heart of it has really been a focus on trying to understand, human behavior, why we do the different things that we do. So I'm excited today to join you and appreciate, as I said, the National Safety Council and really explore this connection between retention and safety. And just to let everyone know, the video copy of this we're going to make available. We can publish an executive summary. And so you're welcome to take notes, but if you don't want to, all this information we're going to make available to people afterwards, just to make it easy for them to access the content. So let's get started. If my slides will advance. There we go. So just real quick, want to mention our company, Whistle Rewards. As Hannah mentioned earlier, we are uniquely focused on really behavior around the job site and what we call the industrial sector, manufacturers, construction industry. Really looking at the behavior around safety compliance, technology adoption, performance retention, and happy to make available more information to people. I don't want to spend much time here, but we did talk about and wanted to offer that as a thank you for people attending the webinar and wanting to learn more. We're looking for more people to pilot and sort of prototype some of the things we're doing. And we're happy to offer a discount to NSC members. They've been a great partner to us, and we're excited about the continuing partnership to advance safety. So today, we're going to talk a little bit about, before we get into the nuts and bolts, a little bit about dopamine. And these two gentlemen, I don't know if anyone's ever heard of Arvid Carlsson or Wolfram Schultz, but these are two scientists who played a major role in understanding of dopamine. And dopamine is a neurotransmitter, so a chemical in our brain that helps regulate our motivation, right? So sort of a reward stimulant. They actually won a Nobel Prize for this work. And it's important because, and I'm starting with this, because this has a huge impact. Dopamine has a huge impact of behavior within your company and on the job site. And generally the way this works, and hopefully there's no neuroscientist, because I'm going to kind of abbreviate or summarize some of these things. But our brains, we've sort of evolved where we have predetermined things that we like, and our brains tell us, yes, we should like those things. Things like social connection, seeing good food, we smell delicious food, we get a dopamine response, we feel good. Our sense of achievement, a sense of belonging, feeling part of community. When we exercise, right, it releases dopamine. So there's things that we do that we've evolved to say, our body tells us, this is a good thing to do, we like this. And so that's sort of in a gist what dopamine is doing. People have a sweet tooth, right? That can be a little over-index on it. But there are not these positive feelings associated with other behaviors, right, as we face them. So when we come up in a workplace environment, we start thinking about a new procedure, new technology, compliance, follow this report. Our natural reaction is not, we're not getting a dopamine feeling. And actually, we have a different effect. So if you think about walking down a path and you see a dark cave, don't really know what's inside there, our instinct is not, hey, we should run in there. That looks great. We're not feeling joy. We might feel a little curiosity, but for most people, it causes a little bit of anxiety. Or if you saw, you're swimming, you're this diver, and you saw this giant sea creature beneath you. For those that are scuba divers, will recognize this is a whale shark. So it's not really a threat to people. But I have a little bit of phobia of being in open water. So this to me would be pretty terrifying because it's unfamiliar to me. And that response, there's also that hardwired response, which is a stress response, the fight or flight response, if you will. So anything, our brain works in a way that anything that is new or unfamiliar to us, these unknown things, so often as we're causing change or trying to bring things forward in the company to help us evolve or progress, we bump into these change resistors. And that release of adrenaline and cortisol actually causes our stress response. So change is biologically hard for us as a creature. So you can now think about, right, dopamine, the things I like, stress producers. So we probably all have familiarity with when I roll out a new safety procedure, how do people react? I don't know if any of these faces look familiar. Playing with some AI tools, I thought it was pretty funny the way they showed up. But this is the typical reaction I've gotten when I'm rolling out a new procedure, whether it's safety related or really any new process. It's not typically met with a lot of enthusiasm, and I think most of us can relate to it. And in fact, this anxiety production in our brain, this cortisol and adrenaline production, our resistance to change is actually one of the great friction points in our ability to be successful and evolve. this author who studied this issue, Amy Moran, looked at this, and her conclusion was this is their fear of change. These fear is the number one thing holding us back. So it's a pretty big resistance if this is being looked at as the reason why people don't succeed in a role. So we have to think about tools and how do we help them overcome this friction and anxiety. So this unknown, right, factor we're dealing with can be changed. We can affect it, but to acknowledge it is hard. And because we often don't understand this, most people haven't really looked at the neuroscience or think about change in this way. We kind of look at it as, well, I pay you to do a job, therefore you should do this job. But in reality, we're asking people to constantly change the work that they're doing. So we're in this state of frequently producing stress response in people, and then frustrated because we're not getting the change result we want. And I can imagine a lot of us can look at, people being consistent with PPE things or behaviors on a job site or just what we'd like them to do, but the way they actually operate. This is a big cause of it. And as we looked at how people think about changing behavior and how they invest in it, we see about 3/4 of companies invest in programs related to behavior change, whether that's safety incentive programs or other factors that help motivate people or incentivize people. We estimate about 90% of that is wasted. And this is really because of lack of understanding of the behavioral neuroscience, some of the things we're talking about, dopamine. And I'll give you a quick example of that, the role of time. So time plays this really important factor when it comes to motivating behavior. And we can think about this, if you think about something like a hot iron, an ability for our brain to connect a behavior or an action to the result. So you can think about it, if my brain registered, if I grabbed a hot iron, something we've all done, or burned our hand on a stove, or a hot toaster, it's a very immediate response. Our brain quickly builds an association to say, hey, when that's hot, let's not touch it. But you can imagine if the effect of, what if I touched that hot iron in a week from now, I then felt that response, right? That stimulant then occurred. It's going to be very difficult for me I might consciously remember that, but I'm probably going to burn myself several more times before that's really going to be hardwired into my brain. So most of us don't really think about this factor of time as we think about rewards, incentives, motivation, behavior. So if we're going to try to we have 2 polls, I think, Hannah, that we were going to try to drop today. I'm not sure how the function works, if we can throw those out there or just let people know those are live. But
I just launched the first poll.
awesome. So we go. We'd love to get people to quickly respond and see how this charts of, how often do you reward or recognize safety behaviors? And so this looks like it's trending pretty similar. What we see is usually about a third, 25, 30% don't really have a program like this. And then more often than not, what we see is monthly, quarterly. That's great. So thank you for doing that. And actually, I'll say at the end, we're going to try to have time for a little Q&A. So I'll be conscious of time. And we'll incentivize people. We'll test this out. So whoever has the best question, we think, Hannah, at the end, I'll let you pick them just to help facilitate this. But I'll send them lunch. I'll send them a $20, $25 gift card for lunch through our platform, a payment tech that they can immediately use and access just to help incentivize people. So thank you for those who participated. And that tracks pretty closely to what our research shows. So we surveyed outside of this several hundred construction workers and asked about the same thing. And what we saw was, in this case, it's a little lower, about 10%. As I said, we typically see the numbers closer to about 25% of people don't have a program. But we see monthly, quarterly is the most common, right? That at the end of the month, I have an incentive. I recognize someone. We talked to one company who said, yeah, every quarter we give away a truck for the person who's, wins the safety award. I said, well, how many employees do you have? And they said, oh, about 5,000. I thought it was a really interesting approach. It's fun to celebrate, but I'm not sure it's going to affect a lot of behavior. And the primary reason is this decay, this effect I talked about, time. And for every day you delay a reward or recognition, when that's separated from the behavior, you lose about 5% of that behavioral impact. So by the time I'm waiting 30 days or a month, I've pretty much lost the ability to influence that behavior. We still like getting rewards. We still like receiving things, and it's fun to give a reward. It's fun to receive rewards. But we're not actually affecting behavior very much at that point. So if we're going to invest in behaviors, we need to do this where it's in the moment and it's happening in real time. It's really critical. Otherwise, we're working in an incredibly inefficient way.
Chris, we did get a question in the chat.
Yeah.
I wanted to pause here just because the question does pertain to the data outlined in this slide. Susie has asked, did only construction workers partake in the poll?
In this specific one that I used for this slide, yes. We have another survey I'm doing right now with safety leaders specifically across both manufacturing and construction. But what we're seeing, and just from the poll we did just now, I don't know how many people responded, but we had a pretty good turnout, it looked like, of responses. We're seeing very similar patterns. Pretty much across the board, we see 75% roughly of companies we found have some sort of program, and the vast majority call it, of that 75%, three-quarters of that is happening on a monthly, quarterly basis. Some in real time, but it's typically pretty small where you have a daily or real time, spot reward program going on.
Wonderful. And please remember a housekeeping for those in attendance to please use the Q&A box for any questions. Otherwise, they'll get buried in the chat box. So
yeah, thank you. And feel free, if people want to jump in and ask questions, I'm happy to take them as we go. So Hannah, jump in if people have specific stuff. I think it's a little bit more engaging than me just rambling on.
okay, well then we can keep the questions coming. Jared asked another one. How do you measure time decay on behavior? Was this a survey your company performed or a separate article or book?
No, there's separate research. There's multiple research on the impact and time value of behavior. And Jared, we actually have a couple blogs on our website. So if anyone wants to email me, I won't unpack all that right now just because of time, but I can point you to those resources. Or you can just go to the Whistle Rewards website. As I said, there's I think 3 different blog posts just on this issue, which cite all the original research as well. So now that we generally understand what we're up against, let's talk a little bit. Let's dive into this issue of employee retention. And what I'm gonna get into for the next, let's say, 20 minutes or so is the connection between safety and employee retention. What are the causes of employee turnover? And as a safety leader, what can you be doing to impact these issues? So safe environments increase retention. That's pretty clear. If we looked at information from, and I have a couple different sources mentioned here, when people feel safe and emotionally supported, they're half as likely to leave. So that's cutting your retention risk in half. Workplaces with strong safety cultures, again, 48% lower. This is some of the work from the National Safety Council. Gallup again has another data point. So, long and short of it is what we're seeing is roughly about 50% of your retention risk you can tie into the sense of safety and environment. So safety is really material in terms of your ability to keep employees on the team. If anyone refutes that or has other thoughts, feel free to post. But if you go out and do research, there's nothing I've seen that refutes this connection. And what's interesting too is the effect of unsafe environments. You can sort of look at this from a neutral standpoint, moving into safe environments, but also environments that people view as inherently unsafe is a really big driver. So it's not just 50%, but you're driving your turnover risk by over 100% if people feel like it's unsafe. So from an HR company operating performance standpoint, this is a really both important but expensive risk. Because if you look at the cost of most skilled employees, right, the economic impact of this is really big. We see lost productivity. Obviously, if I lose someone, whether on the floor or on a job site, the stress on the remaining people, right? So when someone leaves a team, they have to pick up the slack for a period of time, and it creates additional stress and pressure. It's expensive to recruit and hire, onboarding and training. There's been a number of studies that looked at that cost of retention, and typically, depending on the amount of training and skill set, you're looking at anywhere from 3 months, maybe up to 18 months. The equivalent salary of that person is what it costs to replace them. So, for example, in this little example I drew up, if you're a 5,000 person company, let's say we've had 30% turnover rate, about 45,000, let's say, is our medium comp, and these are just some national averages that is digging up. Your cost of that turnover is about $34 million a year. right? It's pretty extraordinary. Now, some of that you're not going to be able to completely eliminate because people move, people, life events happen, but some of that you can. So even reducing this by 2%, you could lower that turnover rate to 28%. That's a $2.2 million savings. So I say that just to help provide some information to safe leaders to understand there are huge economic impacts. And I think that helps make the case for the investment that should be made in people to make these environments more safe. There's clear ROI. Then you can add all the safety ROI, factors of insurance risk and all these other, the costs of someone being injured, just cascades from there. But even on the proactive investment with retention, um, pretty valuable. So pretty clear that there's the safety impact retention, but what about retention's impact on safety? How does this work the other way? And so high turnover leads to inexperienced employees, which is shown to increase your incident risks. So about 40%, 48% of injury claims happen, according to OSHA, when someone's first year of employment. So that turnover rate actually drives or creates in the turnover a huge risk factor where about half your risk then, or safety retention risk, is being driven just by new people showing up in a new role because they have to learn a process, have to learn a new team of people. Um, and there's some interesting data that looks at these patterns of sort of three phases of risk. When I'm new, you can see the non-fatal risk per 100,000 is pretty high. And then it drops pretty quickly over my first 2 years on a job as I become more familiar with that. Um, and some of this is age related as well, but the attribution is really when I'm new in a role, my risk factors go way up. The safety risk for the company goes way up. There's also this interesting, and I just thought it was worth pointing out as we were digging into the research. There's this area of complacency as I get older and I become comfortable, typically in your 40s and 50s, where I'm familiar with the role and maybe I stop paying as much attention. And so we begin to see a pretty good climb, both in non-fatal, but also that's when fatal risks start to really begin to increase. And then you see it spike as you get older. And from what I've read, a lot of that 55 and older has to do with our inability to recover as we get older from more serious injuries because it's inversely related to the non-fatal. So really what's happening there is I'm just not recovering as well. If I fell off a ladder, it might become a fatal injury when I'm 60 versus when I'm 22. I kind of bounce and recover. So in summary, right, you look at these two factors and say how they affect one another. You really can't create a culture of safety without focusing on retention. And I think the National Safety Council has published some pretty good information on this. They looked at some of the reasons and why this was happening. This is a document I took off their website, and there's several more interesting reports. And I think, and I correct me if I'm wrong, but I think this is a topic you guys will probably continue to publish and talk about. But some of the reasons they cited as they looked at this was low pay, lack of advancement, feeling disrespected. So we're really beginning to dig into why are people leaving, right? They're not recognized or supported by their managers. They maybe don't have the opportunity for growth. There's not a clear path for how I can advance. They don't feel connected with the company, the vision, or they don't feel the company's transparent with them. They're communicating effectively. Maybe it's inhibiting my work-life balance. I might have childcare challenges, for example. I need more flexibility and options. So there's lots of good information from Harvard Business Review and SC digging into this. But we wanted to take this a little bit further because one of the things I realized as I focused on this area for a number of years is although we look at why people leave, we also want to understand why people start looking. And as we began to dig into that, we found some disconnect. So it was interesting as we've studied this topic. People often say, when I'm leaving in an exit interview, why are you taking this job or why are you going? They often talk about pay. Well, I'm getting a raise. I'm moving somewhere. I'm getting paid more. That's usually the result of them having left and chosen a different job. But why they started looking more often than not is tied to how they feel in the workplace. So when we study why people stay, the reasons I don't turn over, or why I start looking, the number one reason clearly in all the research we found is I feel valued, supported, appreciated, recognized by my manager. And as given talks around the country, I've often asked audiences, everyone raise their hand who feels their manager recognizes them too much, who feels over-recognized in the workplace. No one has ever said, I'm really overappreciated by my boss. So there's opportunity there, right? There's room there, but it's the number one reason people cite for why they stay or why they begin looking for a job. So there's some parallels between these two lists, but a number of them, right, we could focus on is whether we're safety leaders, whether we're operational leaders, things that we can affect as people to other people on the job site. So obviously things why people leave feeling disrespected, but why people stay, I feel valued and appreciated. I feel heard. People are communicating with me. The sense of feeling engaged and empowered is a byproduct of that, of being listened to and feeling like I have a voice in what's going on around me. Connect with my coworkers, my social sort of ecosystem around me at work becomes really important. Friendship has a big impact. So human relationship is really important in the workplace. And because it's so tightly connected both to turnover and turnover then affects safety, this actually becomes a really important factor of safety of how do I build great cultures. So as a safety leader, you might actually have the most influential role on a job site. One thing we've noticed in the industrial sector in particular is HR is often a corporate function. People are, in offices, but if you look at who interacts with most people on the floor most consistently, it's supervisors and really is safety leaders. The safety leaders are constantly checking up on people, and as mental health and awareness has become more important, checking in with people, just seeing how they're doing. So you have this disproportionately influential role in the population of people distributed in the industrial sector. So as I said, they're typically talking with everyone. In some cases, they're even serving as the unofficial HR representative, where they're identifying issues or they're hearing issues for the first time and helping connect people to resources. As I've talked to a lot of safety leaders around the country, I typically get a lot of head nodding of like, yep, we end up becoming HR. This is particularly true in construction. Because it is a voice and someone who's actively listening and looking at the well-being of that population, right? That's the primary role. And one other footnote is your manager supervisor has this disproportionate impact on these issues. So as we've studied this before, studied recognition, retention, and those connections, we found that the manager has 8 times the effect on retention than like a peer or someone else. So those relationships are all important, but your direct supervisor or that site leader is disproportionately impactful on those issues. And we know if those issues are big drivers of retention, then you have arguably the biggest, probably carrot and stick are the biggest tools to affect this in your role as a safety supervisor and leader. Um, Yeah, and so on this issue of some of these soft skills, we often don't do a lot of training on things like empathetic listening. How do I hear people? But these soft skills become really important for safety leaders, site supervisors, floor managers, people in leadership roles overseeing teams, become really important for people to feel connected and heard. So this was just some other data I thought was interesting to share as we were going through looking at retention and maybe just things to think about as you're talking with people and connecting with them. There are other life activities that also affect people's turnover or affect their role. And I just thought these were interesting to share. Job hunting activities. So some studies that looked at when do people start looking, why they start looking, and they found these triggers tied to different life milestones. I thought in particular one when I'm turning 40 or 50, or I'm going back to like a high school anniversary or alumni event or something, and you're facing people, and it's these moments where you're sort of stepping back. It causes you to reflect on your life. All right, I'm now 50 years old. Have I done the things I want to do? And you're realizing, my own mortality. That actually causes a lot of people to start reflecting and looking at their life, and so that it creates this interesting turnover risk. Um, so maybe an opportunity to talk to people, what's going on, if you know these things are happening.
Chris, we did have a question about the data. Sorry
Yeah.
to.
No, jump in.
Megan is curious about the inclusion of temporary workers in the survey data we've reviewed. Are they a distinct focus or are they integrated into the broader statistics?
I'd have to better understand. So temporary workers, it depends on the study and what we're looking at. So I'd have to look at specific data. In the construction world and the data, it is typically included. It's a little less so when I've looked at other manufacturing sort of data sets. Because construction typically, like 90% of people on a job site, they don't work for a general contractor. There's a lot of contractor activity. Um, but I will say from a safety impact standpoint, I think all of it is probably still holds true, right? You're still going to impact that retention. Although if you're not a direct supervisor, right, because I work for another company, right, obviously there's going to be a little bit more of a gap there. But the impact that site leader still has or floor manager has is still disproportionate. And I would encourage everyone, especially in manufacturing, even if you have temp workers, making them feel part of the team, empowered, only, modeling that behavior helps build a better culture, helps reinforce it. There's only benefits by including them, although I know a lot of companies don't include them. But I think it would be important to do that if you can. So I'm just going to go through for the next few minutes, really 5 recommendations in what you can be thinking about or what you should be doing to impact retention. One, I would say just keep doing what you're doing. I don't want to imply that I think a lot of safety leaders that I've met with really do a fantastic job. They understand the idea of building culture, um, and model these behaviors. I think show up really well. A lot of it, we're in roles sort of on a floor or on a job site for a number of years, so they get the environment. So I think first and foremost, just keep doing the things are impactful. Um, and I think the biggest low-hanging fruit for most organizations is really take this timing issue to heart. Look at your recognition program. As I said, we typically find about 75% of people have recognition programs of some type. So they're already investing money, right? They're already spending funds. But what we find is you're spending that money in a way that's not driving a lot of effect. So think about that. Think about timing. Think about how you might change that. We're happy to help if people want some help looking at that. But there's usually really big opportunities there to improve, the safety cultures, reinforce those behaviors, cause a much bigger effect if you're just thinking about how you're investing those funds a little differently. Um, And if you're doing a recognition program, again, we put this in here so that you have the information at your fingertips, whether it's a slide or, as I said, we'll have an executive summary, but timeliness is a critical issue. And then some other factors worth mentioning. Make sure it's specific to the behavior that you're trying to reinforce, right? The more general it is, the harder it is for people to correlate why you're recognizing me to the action I took. So it has to be timely, has to be specific. Talk about the emotional effect. We are people, and it actually shown that if we talk about the emotional impact of the things you're doing, the benefit it's creating for others, that it has a big impact on the behavior and the repeatability of that. Talk about the result. What was the outcome? When you did that, the whole team's safer. Make sure that people are clear in their understanding of why specifically they're being rewarded. And if you can do those things in a really timely manner, and you can do it frequently, going back to that initial dopamine, what you're beginning to do is program their brain. They're getting a little dopamine hit, like in social media. And it says, hey, when I do these things, I feel good, right? So my brain subconsciously is going to be encouraging me to do more of these things. It's kind of building a Pavlovian response. So ultimately, that's what we're trying to do with recognition tools, is actually help people feel better about doing the things that make them successful and remove that stress friction, that cortisol reaction from these behaviors that feel foreign or unfamiliar. And that's really the power of rewards and recognition, is we can begin to change that cycle in our brain and help people begin to pattern that and then actually feel better about that procedure, doing the safety thing, because I know, well, I did that 3 days in a row, and every day my boss said, great job, and recognized that. Or I was going out of my way to help someone, or stayed late and covered a trench, or right, saw some tools on the floor that I picked up and cleaned, even though I wasn't the one who left them there, but just made this shop floor a little safer. Those things being recognized in the moments, making people feel good about doing that, is your biggest driver of seeing that behavior repeated in pattern. Um, yeah, there's lots of data on the impact of recognition programs, and the effect they have on retention. So if we carry that forward and say, well, we can improve retention by 30, 40%. We can also then drive down a lot of our safety risk through that process. Easy tools to deploy, huge impact. Number three, create feedback loops. Seek out and collect information. Be proactive about doing that. I'm not a big fan of people who, there's some interesting studies on, excuse me, open door policies. Go to people, ask them how they're doing. There's a trick I like to use, which is I often ask people, how are you doing today? And I'll say on a scale of 1 to 10. And it's a very interesting effect if you want to try this out. Most of us just politely, when we say, hey, how you doing? Everyone's like, fine. It's a courtesy. It's like another way of saying hello. If you actually ask them to give you a score, it's always fascinating because people come back and say, well, I'm fine. And I don't know, a 6. Like, wow, a 6, what's going on? Or a 9, like, oh, wow, you're having a great day. What's happening? It creates a mechanism for much better engagement, and demonstrates, I think, that you actually want to hear how they're doing, not just say hi in a different way. And there's some great case studies on the impact of communication, and how much it transforms being sort of proactive and soliciting information, reducing injuries, both in construction and manufacturing. Won't go too deep in these, but anyone can do an online search and find lots of examples of standing up good communication programs. As I said, I think being proactive, I think being frequent about it, I think making people both feel heard and then demonstrating to them the actions you're taking based on that information are really important. There's nothing more frustrating when someone asks you, something brings a risk to your attention and then sees no change occur, right? So you have to close that loop. Improve your onboarding. So onboarding has a huge impact on employee retention, and most of us confuse onboarding with orientation. It really takes people about 90 days to become effective on a job. We see, obviously, from the other data, a lot of risk factors in those new roles. So we need to think about how we design that experience of onboarding, and really that it's probably several months long, right? And be intentional about how we design that. An exercise I think that's pretty easy to go through is just to describe the destination or completion of onboarding. How do I want people, like, what do I want them to know once they're onboarded, right? But also, what do I want them to feel? How do they feel once they're part of our team? And write those down. And what I find pretty consistently when we do that little whiteboard exercise with clients is they have really clear ideas of how they want people to feel. But when they examine what they've done, there's no evidence they did anything to make them feel that way. And so we're all human. That emotional component is super important. And pretty quickly, you can identify for your own organization some ways you can change that onboarding process or experience, whether you want people to feel more part of a team, more connected, more aware of certain things. Lots of opportunity there, but being intentional. In our own case studies on this, we've as I said, there's lots of data online, but we worked not too long ago with a good-sized manufacturer, about 1,200 employees. This was nice because it was a little bit of a blind study. They had 7 different sites. We focused on just 3 of those sites, but lowered within 90 days through a combination of helping them rethink their onboarding and launching a recognition program. We lowered their turnover rate by 26%. So just at those 3 locations, the company estimated we saved about $2.3 million. So pretty powerful ROIs from making these changes. And then partner with HR to create clear growth paths and invest in soft skills. One of the things people talk about is, my role, how does it grow and evolve? I think, it's pretty easy to create some sort of matrix that people can just see, where I can go, but also what are the skills I need or what are the competencies to get there? So people can begin to self-identify the different paths and opportunities, even if they're not highly motivated to pursue it. Just the fact they know it's there and that's, they're supported on that journey can have a big impact on retention and ultimately safety. And we've seen things even, we worked with an airline, helped them design a frontline manager training program. And what we saw was people who participated were really twice as likely to stay as those who did not. So a huge impact when people feel they're supported and they're supporting the development of those skills that make them effective in the role. So just as I said, these 5 risks account for about half your retention. So if you're doing these things well, um, onboarding feedback loops, listening, better recognition program. That's about half your retention risk right there. As I said, you really can't make this zero because there's other factors outside of your control. But in most companies, if you could do these things, the ROI is massive. And because of that connection to safety, I'd actually argue that close to half your safety risk actually ties into this sort of culture, retention, performance world. So this partnership with HR to really address this, I think not only has a massive ROI, but really just creates a better environment for everyone to live and operate in. So we're about 40 minutes into the journey, pretty good on the time I was shooting for. Wanted to open up to questions from the group, comments, thoughts.
There are many. So
Wonderful.
let's get started. So happy we have this extra time. Let me go all the way back to the top of the chat and we'll just go down the list.
And Hannah, you're gonna have to score these somehow so that you can decide who's gonna get the lunch.
Oh, yeah. I don't know if I can do that. The questions keep coming. Now we're getting even more. This is gonna be this is gonna be a lot to keep up with. All right. Well, a question from Wilhelmina. How do you get management to buy into that safety is a part of retention?
Well, hopefully, presentations like this. I mean, take these slides. I think you can go back and present some of this information. I gave a similar talk for the National Safety Council at one of their conferences. I had more than a dozen safety leaders just ask for the deck. And the reason was because I want to go to my leadership and talk to them about this connection. I want to show them the data and why this is so valuable for us to invest in. So use these tools we're organizing with the National Safety Council to your advantage.
Great. A more personal question. What was your safety moment? Rhonda would like to know the thing that opened your eyes to the importance of safety.
Ooh, that was probably when I was pretty young. I started out just out of high school working at a factory in a rougher part of my town. And there were definitely several times with some of the work I was doing, moving these 55-gallon barrels of printing ink, where I felt pretty unsafe and really began to open my eyes to then going to other workplaces, seeing how different people manage safety. So fortunately, it wasn't a catastrophic incident or something like that, but it was really working on a factory floor and realizing, the difference between an environment where I felt unsafe with some of the equipment and what I was doing and the amount of training, and then going to a place where people really taught you well how to do things. Pretty big difference.
Great. This next question, there's actually multiple different individuals who've asked a question in this same vein. The question is, does the incentive weight create a different response? For example, getting candy versus getting something expensive. In other
Yeah,
words, does the
it does
behavior?
actually.
Okay.
So the science on this, I'll crudely summarize, is the recognition is really important, right? Just recognize the behavior. The reward creates a multiplying effect to that. That's just kind of the way it works. We found in both our own surveys and research, and from what other studies have shown, is um, cash is by far the most effective motivator for people because you're often giving them then the flexibility to use that reward in a way that meets them where they are. So when we've surveyed people and asked them what type of reward do they prefer, what motivates them, um, both self-reported analysis says it's cash, about almost 90%. We like to give away t-shirts and do company swag, and that's important from tribalism, right? From being a part of a community, feeling a sense of belonging. But it's actually only about 1.5% people want that or feel that's a good motivating factor for them. And because of our business, we can actually see how people spend reward funds when we give them to them. And the vast majority, especially if we're dealing with blue collar hourly workers, the vast majority of money goes to gas and groceries. So we see a lot of point systems where you can earn up and save points for 6 months and earn a toaster, or I can buy some merchandise. When someone really just wants $20 to buy dinner for the family or put a little extra gas in a truck, that's a lot more important to them. So our philosophy is really, meet people where they are, support the team and sort of what they're asking for. And the science shows it's the biggest motivator as well. But I will say it also doesn't have to be big dollar amounts. People often think, we need to give out $500 prizes. We're much bigger fans of small dollar, high frequency rewards. So I'll buy a coffee a couple times a week, right? I'll shoot you $5. I can do that digitally now with almost no transaction cost. That is the best way to affect behavior.
I love that. That's great. That's a very dynamic response. This question has come up several times, so I think we should address it. OSHA cautions against incentivizing safety. In other words, it could cause underreporting to meet a goal. With incentive programs, what do you focus on to not interfere with this problem? This question's come up in a variety of
Yeah.
different ways.
No, and it comes up pretty often because OSHA's issued a couple bulletins on this, and it speaks specifically to incentivizing underreporting. So what they don't want to see happen, and what isn't helpful, is to say, we'll give everyone a bonus if we go 30 days without a, job site incident, because then everyone is motivated to like hide, right, an incident. What we typically focus on as we work with clients are what are the behaviors that actually drive the safety outcomes? What are the things I want to champion? So it's and more of that we see people actually encouraging more reporting, not less, because that reporting gives new insights into what's going on, and maybe there's things that can be proactive. So in most cases, it's really understanding what are those behaviors that drive the result and focusing there versus trying to incentivize, right, the result or underreporting. And OSHA has been very supportive of behaviors, and there's pretty strong data on the effect of when done well, it reduces workplace injury and lost time. There's one study, I think it was 78% when the safety incentive program is in place versus not. This is a very large study across hundreds of companies. So the data is pretty compelling when done well or done right, huge effect, but don't incentivize bad behavior or underreporting.
All right, we're still getting a lot of questions in the chat. We
That's
still
great.
have
Well, maybe
17
maybe maybe
questions.
we'll pick the top three. So maybe we'll take the top three. We'll buy them lunch.
Um, how do you reward those who think rewards are not necessary? They just want to do their job and go home. They feel they don't need the extra stuff. And where does that thought process come from?
Yeah, that's about 1% of people. So it is true. There are people who say, I don't need that. I've heard it more from managers. I'd probably say about 10%, maybe 20% of leaders. I haven't seen exact data on this. Will say things like, well, people should just show up and do the job. And generally, I agree. I think that's right. Um, there are two thoughts or reactions I have. One, if the job I was hired to do, I'm still doing the same thing 3 years from now, I'll be shocked, right? Because what we often find is the job and role is constantly changing. I have to learn new things. I have to change my role. So I'm creating stress, in people because I'm asking them to, well, we have new technology. We have a new HRS system. So you have to record your timesheets differently. I have to put in, there's all this change around us. So I think rewards are especially impactful when we're patterning new behavior or bringing about change because I'm asking you to do things differently. The other answer I often give is a little more glib, a little more flip, is uh, your philosophy around motivation is not important as the outcome you're trying to produce. So even if you're a manager and you feel like, well, people should just show up and do the job, I shouldn't have to reward them. Everyone appreciates it and it causes a huge effect. So maybe you don't like it, but especially in younger populations, 20, 30 somethings who's grown up with social media, constant reinforcement reminders, your lack of recognition or appreciation or rewarding not only is it when it's absent from, let's say, my generation, okay. But if you're 20 something and you're not being, people aren't recognizing your work in some way, it actually has the opposite effect where you feel like I'm beginning to do something wrong because my boss hasn't given me reinforcement or recognition. So it's creating risk within your population by the fact you don't do these things. So you can say, you can have your philosophy, fine, or you can look at the outcome. I usually look at it. I'd like to drive a better result, even if my core philosophy says I shouldn't be doing this.
Great.
Hope I didn't offend anyone with that comment. It's, I follow the science.
This next question actually goes back to the initial topics you covered in the early part of the presentation, but I didn't want to interrupt you. So we're going down the list. Are there any studies on the impact of tenured employees coaching new employees regarding safety? This may help to avoid complacency while indoctrinating new employees into the safety culture.
Um, off the top of my head, am not aware of any studies. I've read a lot about mentoring and coaching. I think it's a great comment. I think it's probably an area, Hannah, maybe we should be looking at digging into a little more because I do think that, and seeing a lot of more recently, especially with technology and how quickly it's advancing, I've seen presentations on that sort of younger, older partnership. You're new on the job. The younger person is helping the more senior person become more familiar with new tech. And conversely, the older person is helping them understand, the reality of the job and the work. And so I think those sort of mentoring, coaching relationships are super powerful. But it's a lot of anecdotal evidence, but a lot. Um, but I haven't seen studies yet. Um, but if anyone in the group has them, feel free to post a link. We'll dig into it and share that with the group. I think it's a great topic.
Yeah, another question regarding surveying and maybe some additional interesting data if we don't already have access to it is, do you also look at the economic impact of workers' comp claims versus the cost of safety reward programs?
Yeah, I mean we have not done a lot of our own research on this. There is a lot of data on the ROI on investing in safety incentive programs is pretty clear. The downstream effect of savings. We've done some work with Procore more in the construction world because they do a lot of research. For those who don't know, the largest construction management software platform, manage like half the construction in the US basically is managed through their systems. They've identified a number of early stage risk factors, and they can factor in a lot of those downstream costs. So there's a lot of evidence around the value creation there. If you're building cultures of safety, addressing some of the issues we talked about today, um, and I'll say this is actually in from attending some of the other seminars, Hannah, that the NSC puts on. You guys have great partnerships in the insurance industry. We're also testing and evaluating new technology. Come back and share that with your members. I know there's a great presentation. I forget which insurance company, but they're looking at these factors as well because I think, they're obviously wanting to lower these risk factors for everyone. It's good for their business. It's good for people. It's good for your business. So they're studying these things as well. So I think in the next couple of years, we're going to see more and more data on this specific topic coming out. But I think behavior has been underinvested historically. And that's a little rambling, long-winded answer, but I think it's a great question. I think it's just the data is just really coming out that's correlated or causational, I should say, but there's a lot of correlated data about impact.
Yeah, I studied behavioral economics in college, and back at that time, there really wasn't a whole lot of data. So I'm really glad that this stuff is coming out now. Another keeping going down the line of questions. This is a great one. We've talked in this presentation about individual incentive. Do you think collective reward is valuable to help people to look after each other, for example, in a plant setup rather than individual?
Um, you know, I think both can be effective. It's a little bit cultural dependent on where you are. I mean, there's interesting cultural phenomenon like Germany or Japan where individual rewards culture are kind of frowned upon. Like you're standing out, you're better than everyone else. That's certainly not the case in the United States. So a little bit of just kind of what is the culture of the organization. I think if you can do both, that's the best. But factors like time are more important to me, that they're shown to have greater impact. So it's a little more use case specific on what you're trying to accomplish. But yes to team rewards as well, if those behaviors are being patterned by the team or the result is being produced by the team. So it's an and, not an or.
Great. I'm scanning through the chat just to try to consolidate questions because I know
Yeah,
some people have been asking the same types of topics. So give me a
yeah.
second.
Incentives work. I think we've got about time for maybe two or three more.
Great. Um, what is a good way to instill in C-suite level how important onboarding is? Certain organizations speed through this to get their new hires out into the workforce.
Yeah, well, I think bringing this type of information to them, letting them understand the value, it does in some cases take some time to educate. It's tough to do if the company leadership doesn't see the value. I'll just be honest. I mean, there's a little bit of you're gonna be pushing water uphill if you're fighting the leaders on the importance of onboarding. I think there's more and more evidence. There's more and more conversations at executive retreats, leadership levels on the importance of people. And I think especially in the last couple of years with in our post-COVID world, we're going to be labor tight for quite a while. So I think things like retention will only become more important, not less in the coming years. Um, and I think that's helping the C-suite become more sensitive to these types of ideas. So I would take a couple of these slides and make your case and get a sense of where your leadership suite is in supporting this. The ROI is pretty clear. I mean, you can't deny the economics.
I will, our last question, save the best for last. You talked about how dopamine and time impact behavior change. Can you give an example of how a company successfully used timely rewards to improve safety or retention?
Yeah, I think the case study is probably came before the one I mentioned earlier, but we went in and deployed. So as a company, a manufacturer and sort of logistics, some production, some distribution, but I think they had 7 different sites. We went into 3 to study against, right? So it was a nice controlled study because we took half the population and said we're going to deploy these programs. They had I think it was like 120% annualized turnover rate, so pretty high, which is not uncommon in warehousing environments. Their onboarding was an orientation they did for a day. A lot of the orientation was centered around the risks of the job, which honestly felt a little terrifying. So the question of how do you want people to feel? Well, if you don't want them to feel scared, maybe the first 3 hours of your day shouldn't be, you know, all the risks on the job. Can that come in day 2, or can they meet people first? So we looked at their onboarding, but we also gave managers budgets and gave them recognition budget to and specific behaviors we were focused on. So each month, for a couple months, we focused on a different behavior, both teaching management how to identify that, how to champion it, but helping elevate it across the population. And within 90 days, 26% reduction in their turnover rate. So that's when I know we can, speak to. I know we can affect. We've seen similar results in other companies. Is if you do the right things, these are pretty big impacts pretty quickly.
Awesome. Well, we do have 2 minutes left. I wanted to take a moment to thank Chris for joining us today and for giving this amazing presentation. The slides will be made available to you as well as a recording of the webinar. So no need to jot down a bunch of notes. If you haven't already been taking notes, we'll get these out to you. And we hope that you have an opportunity to enjoy all of the other resources available to you throughout National Safety Month. We will be making the link available so you can sign up for some of our other future webinars. We do have one coming up at the end of this month with the MSD Solutions Lab, and we'd love to see you there. Chris, any final takeaways with our last minute together you'd like to share?
Just thank you for the opportunity to be here, and I'll share one last behavioral science nugget.
Oh,
Um,
yes, please do.
these 2 companies, which I think are pretty interesting, IKEA and Lego, and they both leverage the same behavioral science concept, which is called the IKEA effect, which is we place a lot more value in things we help create, about 63% more value to be precise. So as you're thinking about building your safety programs, as you're thinking about, rolling out onboarding orientation, ask people their opinion, get their input, have them involved in the process, whether that's up in your organization, across or down. The more you can engage people in those conversations early on, the more sense of ownership they have, the more success you'll have about bringing about the change within your own organization. And that's it.
Amazing. And that's it. We are right at time. Thank you, everybody, for being here with us this afternoon. And thank you again, Chris. And everybody, please be safe.
Take care, everybody. Thank you.